So like quite a few of you, I've been watching the Book of Boba Fett every single Wednesday for the past 7 weeks. And I've championed this show for pretty much anyone who will listen to my incessant ranting about Star Wars. But to be honest, this show has had its ups and its downs. And now that we're past the finale of season 1, we're past that episode 7 mark, I want to take a look back at the first season and see what worked and what didn't work for the Book of Boba Fett. So buckle in and let's review season 1 of the Book of Boba Fett.
Boba Fett.
First off, I want to talk about the things that worked. And before I get into any negatives about the show, I do want to say that I liked this show. It wasn't perfect, and I really don't think it was as good as The Mandalorian, but there were some things that, for me, really worked about the show. And the number one thing, and they really got this right, in my opinion, and that's just Boba Fett himself. He didn't really have a lot of characterization in the original trilogy. So, if we're going to be looking at the Book of Boba Fett, I really don't want to look at it from the lens of, is this exactly what we got in the original trilogy? Because if we're going to have a whole show about Boba Fett, I want to have more of him than what we got in the original trilogy. When we talk about characterization, I don't want to look so much as the original trilogy as I want to look at the Clone Wars. And that's kind of where his story really gets fleshed out. And the Clone Wars actually did quite a few Boba Fett storylines, kind of starting with some vengeance and revenge against Mace Windu. And they brought him to a place as a character where he came around to actually a really heroic arc. It's an arc that actually never got completely finished, but you can watch parts of it online still today. And I really wish that they would have taken this Clone Wars arc that kind of completed Boba Fett's childhood story and included it in the final season of the Clone Wars like they did for that Bad Batch arc. But unfortunately, instead, we got the Martez sisters, which I don't think anyone was really happy about. But in this unfinished story, which isn't considered canon, by the way, but there's aspects of the story which are kind of canonized by this finale. In this unfinished story, we see Boba Fett protecting a village against none other than Cad Bane. Now, if that reminds you of anything, it's probably because you just watched the Book of Boba Fett, and they really play a similar story arc out in this finale. But he has a quote in this episode: "No more innocent people are gonna die or be locked up or live in fear." So we see that Boba Fett really went on this journey as a character as a teenager. He shoots Cad Bane right in the head, and Cad Bane shoots him right in the head. Boba Fett ends up with the iconic dent on his helmet, and Cad Bane presumably died. However, I actually think that this scene and this fight, while it's not technically considered canon, I think that it has kind of been canonized by this episode because they reference this fight that they had when Boba was a child. He even says that himself, "I'm not a child anymore." I think that's a little funny statement for him to say as a full-grown adult. "I'm not a child anymore," but he says it, and then they shoot, and when Cad Bane gets shot, his hat comes off and you see a metal plate on his head that wasn't there previously, and it shows us that he probably got shot by Boba Fett. And that shot did a lot of damage, and he has a metal plate on it now. But this quote really summarizes the same arc that Boba Fett goes through in this show, where he gains more compassion for just the average Joe. Boba Fett went through a dark period as an adult, and he even says this himself, where he's not about that life anymore. So he went through this arc as a teenager, kind of lost his way as an adult, and then now in the Book of Boba Fett, he's coming back to that same area of catharsis that he had as a young child. Okay, so Boba Fett worked for me. I got a lot of what I was hoping to get out of his character. We got to see the Sarlacc escape, which was amazing. I loved that direction that we got to start the show with, was going back to the Sarlacc. And by the way, rest in peace, Sarlacc. I'm super bummed that they killed a creature that was thousands of years old, but all right, I guess the Sarlacc's dead now. We got to see what happened in between Return of the Jedi and his first appearance in Mandalorian Season 2. That was cool. And that really is the next thing that worked for me, was his time with the Tuskens. I loved getting to see the Sand People, and we get to see this in Mandalorian Season 2, where the Sand People are starting to get reframed for us as not necessarily these horrible evil creatures that we kind of think of them as when we think of Star Wars and the Tuskens. but these new shows shed a different light on the Tuskens. This isn't even a new approach. If you're a longtime Star Wars fan and you're reading the novelizations of maybe The Phantom Menace, you might know what I'm talking about. In the novelization for The Phantom Menace, Anakin, as a young boy, actually goes and rescues a injured Tusken, reviving them, sharing food with them and his campfire, and ultimately returning him to his tribe. This is both an interesting scene from the perspective of seeing the innocence of a young Anakin, but it's also interesting from the idea of this guy is going to slaughter a bunch of Tuskens in a couple of years from now. We look at that scene from the perspective of Anakin, Klieg Lars, and Shmi Skywalker and view the Tuskens as the sole aggressors, but actually this might be the result of centuries-long conflict between the Tuskens and the human settlers of Tatooine, and maybe Shmi was just caught in the crossfire. Either way, I really enjoyed getting to see Tusken culture in a way that we never had before. We got to see them kind of speak for the first time in Mandalorian Season 2, but this went so much further. We learned about some of their rituals, we learned a little bit about their spirituality, their religion, but we got to see that they are fearsome fighters. One of the best parts of the entire show, hands down, was the arc of them and Boba Fett taking on this train heist, essentially. It actually kind of reminded me of the train heist in the Han Solo prequel movie. I enjoyed that movie and I enjoyed that train heist, so maybe that's why I enjoyed this section, but in my opinion, that was the best action piece of maybe the entire show, which is a little weird that it was buried so early on. So those two things are the things that for me worked really well. Boba Fett and the Tuskens. What else worked about the show? Well, to be honest, there's not anything else that really worked perfectly for me. There was other good things, yes. Did I like the Mandalorian episode? Of course I did. Did I like the Grogu, Luke, and Ahsoka episode? Yes, of course I did. Did those belong in this show? No, not really. And so now I want to talk about the things that for me didn't work about the Book of Boba Fett. And I kind of want to split this into two subcategories. One are the things that were in the show that I didn't think should be in the show. And then there's the things that weren't in the show that I wish were in the show. So the first category is what was in the show that I think just shouldn't have been in there. And I already mentioned it, but I don't think that 2 whole episodes should have been taken up with Luke, Ahsoka, Grogu, and Mando. This is the Book of Boba Fett. And if all of that had really actually tied into this, then yeah, maybe it could have been included, but Luke had nothing to do with Boba Fett. Ahsoka had nothing to do with Boba Fett. Mando was really only brought in for that finale. I just think that all of that belonged in a different show. Release Mandalorian season like 2.5 or something. Guys, we literally got almost an entire season's worth of character development for Mando in those 2 episodes, if you really think about it. I mean, he was kicked out of his house, House Vizsla. He made armor for Grogu. He got a new ship, and he delivers that armor to Luke. Gets convinced by Ahsoka that Grogu should actually stay with Luke. Luke and Grogu go through this whole process of training and eventually coming to a kind of a T in the road where Grogu now has to make a decision. Is he going to go with the Jedi or is he going to go with Mando? And eventually he chooses Mando over the life of being a Jedi. I just think that that should have been its own thing. It didn't belong in this show. I loved it, but it didn't belong. Another thing that I think just shouldn't have been in the show was just a lot of the Tatooine present day plot. And I generally liked the plot, but in the first few episodes where it was kind of going between the plot and then these flashbacks of the Tuskens, I was bored with the Tatooine plot. I think it really could have been written better, simplified, and explained and actually tied into the conflict that we see in the rest of the show as far as Boba Fett and the Tuskens and his character development. Yes, at the end, they bring it back and say, well, actually, it was the Pikes that went and killed these bad guys. By the time that reveal happens, we're so separated from that plot point of the Tuskens dying that it really doesn't feel like that plot is connected to this plot in any way whatsoever. Also, who are the twins? Can we talk about that for a second? Why are they in this show at all? You could scrap them and have the mayor or the Pikes be the one that send Black Chrysanthemum after Boba, and the show literally plays out the exact same way, other than we need someone to gift a Rancor to Boba. Really, they had no purpose at all in the show. I wonder if they're setting them up for something in the future, but if they are, I just feel like they were really shoehorned into this. And it's a bummer because, as I'll talk about in a second, there's a lot of things that didn't happen in the show that I think if the twin plot wasn't in there, we could have gotten this other, better, more important stuff. Let me see. What else was in the show that shouldn't have been in it? All right, the mods. Whose idea was this? They are completely out of place in the Star Wars universe. When you look at episode 8 and you watch Canto Bight and you feel like this is a different movie than Star Wars, this doesn't feel like it's the Star Wars universe, that's what the mod bike people are in this show. They just do not belong aesthetically, stylistically, their dialogue, everything about it just doesn't scream Star Wars, let alone Boba Fett. The design felt like a cheap sci-fi direct-to-VHS movie from the 90s. And seriously, let's not even get into that speeder chase. It's been covered by enough other YouTubers and reviewers. But that, seriously, hands down has to be the lamest thing that has ever been in a Filoni
and Leia
show.
and the Stormtroopers.
Okay?
Endor chase
Like,
from the
everything
90s
from the
was
ugly
shot.
design.
Why did it look
like
better in the
this?
80s than it does right now in 2022?
Okay, I know I said I wasn't going to get into the whole speeder chase thing. I'm sorry, but at the end of the finale when Boba Fett kind of implies that he's going to be giving over the position of Dynamo to these mods, I was very, very heartbroken. As if there's some type of representation of Tatooinean culture, whereas they're not. Aesthetically, design-wise, they're not at all.
Okay, this is future me editing this video, grabbing clips for it, and finding one further criticism of the mods that I just have to mention. Why does the lead mod girl have a British accent? It's well established in universe that different accents in Earth translate to different accents in Star Wars. So the British accent is actually a core world accent, common in Coruscant and other core worlds. So why is she British if she claims to have grown up on Tatooine? It makes no sense whatsoever.
All right, let's get into what wasn't in the show that I wish was. And there's a few things that totally could have been fit into this show if you would have removed some of that stuff that I mentioned earlier. First of all, I just wanted more with the Tuskens. Not just more Tuskens, but I really want it framed in a different way. I'm almost thinking that we could completely re-edit the show to have not these flashbacks, but just have the first 3 episodes just be Boba Fett getting out of the Sarlacc pit, encountering the Tuskens, gaining their trust, eventually helping them, and the end of that first 3 episodes is them doing that train heist and then eventually losing the Tuskens, going and getting his ship. That first act could end with him and Fennec then going and meeting up with Mando for Mandalorian Season 2. I think that would have been a much better way to edit this show because then we're not getting these weird flashbacks. Why is he able to battle just fine with the Tuskens and with Din Djarin in Mando Season 2? And then all of a sudden now, years later, he can't battle without going in the Bacta tank, and now the Bacta tank is the mechanism for which we're going to see these flashbacks. You can cut out the Bacta tanks entirely if you just set the first act of the show as a prequel to his appearance in Mandalorian Season 2. Then the second act of the show could be the Tatooine plot and really figuring out what it means to be the Dynamo, taking the place of Jabba the Hutt, establishing himself, kind of uncovering this plot. And at the end of Act 2, that's when he finds out about the Tuskens being killed not by just random bikers, but in fact being killed by the Pikes. It gives him that Luke, I am your father, moment at the end of the 2/3 mark of this show to really have that, okay, now I have to balance revenge and also taking care of the people of Mos Eisley. We needed that to be revealed earlier on. And so if they would have structured it Act 1, then Act 2 is discovering this plot. Act 3, which was really just the final 2 episodes, is, all right, Fennec's gonna go try and recruit some people. Fennec can be the person that goes to Freetown, which I hate that name, by the way. Fennec can be the person to go get Din Djarin. And then the finale still kind of plays out in a lot of the same way. The next thing I wish we would have got to see in the show, but we didn't get to see, was him training the Rancor. You always hear in storytelling, show, don't tell, but they didn't do either of these. They didn't tell us that he trained the Rancor, and they didn't show us him training the Rancor. In fact, what they did do was tell us that this is almost impossible, and it's pretty much done by no one, and it's extremely hard, and it takes a lot of time and patience. And then he just shows up with the Rancor. What the heck? Like, that would have been awesome to see. Maybe in that reworking of the penultimate episode when Fennec is going and recruiting everyone, Boba stays back at the palace, and we see him taming the Rancor. He should have actually had an important plot point be him getting over the hurdle of taming the Rancor. Heck, we got to see a whole montage of Mando learning how to ride on the blurgs, and those are even commonly used as mounts in universe. Yet, Boba Fett learning how to ride on a Rancor, we don't even get to see that process. He just shows up in the finale. I was also a little bit miffed that he moves so fast. It makes us think that the Rancor that was previously in Jabba's palace kind of sucked because it moved so slow. See, there's some things that when you reframe one thing and the way we understand it to be something totally different, it works well if it doesn't lessen the value of that other thing. The final thing I think this show needed was some stakes. Okay, not that kind of stakes. I mean, literally, like, no one dies in the last couple episodes of the show whatsoever. If these giant droids are really such a threat, why are we not showing this happening? Why are we not showing the unnamed mods and villagers of Freetown just getting completely blown up with the droid just, people flying left and right? Even at a certain point, the droid has all these people kind of pinned down, and they're behind this wall that's like a foot thick, and the droid is shooting at it, and like nothing's happening, tiny little pockmarks. If this droid is that big, why is it not actually destroying the wall? Earlier on in the show, we had a lot of people dying. We got to see the entire Tuskens die. We got to see injuries before that. Like, we got more stakes in the first couple episodes than we had in the last few. It almost tonally felt like two different shows. And I think that kind of sums up my big issue with the Book of Boba Fett, is not that it's a bad show. The first parts are good and they're serious, and the last parts are good and they're not super serious, and there's not really any stakes, but I enjoyed it still. For me, it just felt like a tonal whiplash between what is able to happen in this story. At first, characters are able to die because the entire Tusken village gets slaughtered, and then pretty much everyone lives in the finale where it actually could have had some impact. Also, is Cad Bane dead? I don't think so. I really don't think so. What do you guys think? Comment below if you think that Cad Bane has made his final live-action appearance, timeline-wise. I really doubt they brought him back in live action just to have him show up for like 5 total minutes of screen time and then kill him off. It's my wife's favorite character, so if Cad Bane is dead, Dave Filoni's gonna get some angry fan mail. So again, overall, I liked this show. I just wish that they could have done a few things differently, taken out some stuff, added in some stuff. But would I watch this again? Absolutely. It was a fun show. It was good content, and nothing of it had major contradictions with the Star Wars that we know and love. But what did you think about the Book of Boba Fett? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Comment down below. Let me know what you're thinking, and we'll see you guys on the next review.
We're reviewing a film or TV show to find whether or not I liked it.